He was about to confess his love, then she vanished without a word. 4 years later, she returns, with twin boys who have his eyes. But behind their innocent smiles lies a buried truth, and a betrayal that could cost them everything. Why did she run, and what secret did she carry with her all these years? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The Sinclair Foundation Charity Gala was a spectacle of opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a ballroom filled with LA's elite. Waiters moved like dancers between champagne flutes and gold-plated hors d'oeuvres, but none of the shimmer could distract Daniel Sinclair. The billionaire CEO, tall and stoic in a custom midnight suit, stood at the balcony rail, staring out at the Pacific. His jaw was tight, his drink untouched. He hated this night. Every year since the gala began, Elena Cruz had been the one to coordinate every detail, from the guest list to the orchid arrangements. She had been more than his executive assistant. She had been his anchor. And then, without warning, 4 years ago, she disappeared. No resignation, no goodbye, no trace. His board called it an HR issue. He called it betrayal. Mr. Sinclair, his head of security's voice cut through the crowd. "We have a situation at the entrance." Daniel turned sharply. What kind of situation? To help his wife choose not to. A guest arrived, uninvited. She has no RSVP, but she handed off an invitation from last year. And, "Sir, it's Elena Cruz." Time stopped. Without answering, Daniel moved through the crowd like a shadow, heart pounding harder with each step. It had been 4 years. He had convinced himself she'd left because of ambition, or maybe fear. But to walk in now, on this night, and then he saw her. Wearing a floor-length burgundy gown that shimmered under the lights, Elena stood near the gallery entrance, her posture proud but tense. Her hair was longer now, pulled into a graceful knot, her eyes darker than he remembered, guarded. But it was her. Daniel's breath caught. He nearly stepped forward until he noticed the 2 small hands clutching the sides of her gown. Twin boys. Maybe 4 years old? Maybe. Just old enough? Elena shifted slightly, placing a hand protectively on the boy's shoulders. She looked up, and their eyes met. Serious. His breath left him. The crowd continued to swirl around them, oblivious to the emotional collision happening in the room. Elena's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. One of the twins tugged her hand. She leaned down and whispered something, and they both nodded. Then she turned, moving toward the staircase, away from him. "Elena," he said, voice barely audible. She froze, but didn't look back. He watched her pause at the gala's edge, kneel down to tie one boy's shoelace, then gently squeeze both of their hands. Then she stood, passed the coat check, and walked toward the exit. Before she disappeared, she handed something to a passing server. The server approached Daniel with wide eyes. "She asked me to give you this?" He took the envelope with trembling hand. It was small, cream-colored, and unmarked, except for one faint fingerprint. Inside was a photo, 2 boys, in matching sweaters, sitting in front of a birthday cake with 4 candles. He stared at the image for a long time, heart hammering in his chest. The resemblance was unmistakable. Tucked behind the photo was a folded note. In familiar handwriting, it read, "We need to talk, but not here." He read it again, and again. Elena, her boys, his sons, and he didn't move, couldn't. The music, the laughter, the chandeliers, all of it faded. For 4 years, he'd lived with a hole in his chest. Tonight, that hole opened again. But this time, something inside it was reaching out. He clenched the note, eyes scanning the door. She was gone. But this time, he wasn't letting her disappear without answers. Daniel left the gala without speaking to anyone. The board could wait, the press could speculate. The photo in his breast pocket burned like a match to his chest. Back in his car, he stared at the image again. The twin boys, dark curls, mischievous grins. identical dimples he'd once seen in the mirror as a boy. They were his. He knew it. Every instinct screamed it. But Elena, how could she? The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Home, sir?" "You heard?" Daniel said quietly. "Not yet." He pulled out his phone. Her number had been disconnected for years. He tried anyway. "Voicemail?" He sat in silence, remembering the way she'd once laughed at his terrible coffee orders. The way she'd known when he needed silence and when he needed pushing. How her touch had lingered once, accidentally, then never again, until she vanished. And now she was back, with children. His children? His hands trembled. He made one call to his private investigator. "Find Elena Cruz. Tonight." That evening, he barely slept. The gala's highlights made headlines by morning, but deep in a quiet LA suburb, Elena sat on a porch swing, watching her boys play with wooden blocks. Arcos and Elias, 4 years old, curious, stubborn, and endlessly energetic. She hadn't expected to see Daniel tonight. She'd only come to leave the note discreetly, to finally tell him on her terms. But their eyes had met, and she'd seen it in his face. He knew. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Elena," came a soft voice from behind. It was Marisol, her neighbor and closest friend. "You okay?" Elena nodded slowly. "I saw him." Marisol sat beside her. How did he look? Like he'd been hit by a train. Here Alex free to stand, pulling her lovely hoodie back for me, as I stooped to pick up the boys alone. "You brought her away, a line from ashes." Elena looked down. "But I didn't tell him, not once." Marisol placed a hand on hers. "You were scared, you had reasons." Elena bit her lip, glancing at the photo of the twins on her phone. "But how do you explain 4 years of silence? 4 birthdays, 4 winters, 4 Christmas mornings without a father? You did what you had to do to protect them and yourself." Elena didn't respond. The next morning, she walked the boys to preschool, fingers tightening around theirs. She kissed them both on the head and smiled through the ache in her chest. But as she turned to leave, she saw him. Daniel, across the street, dressed in black slacks and a navy sweater, his eyes locked on hers. He crossed the road. "Elena," he said. She didn't run. She didn't smile. She whispered. He nodded. "Then tell me when." She hesitated. "Tomorrow, noon, the pier." He gave a single nod and turned to walk away. But before he did, his eyes fell to the drawings the boys had taped on the preschool gate. 2 little stick figures holding hands, with a taller one in the middle, all smiling. Daniel swallowed hard. Elena watched him go. Her legs trembled. The secret was out. The moment she dreaded and dreamed of was finally here. Tomorrow, she would tell him everything. But not all truths would heal. Some might shatter the fragile life she had built. Still, she owed him that much. And maybe, just maybe, her sons deserved the whole story. Elena Cruz remembered the shimmer of the city skyline through the penthouse windows of Sinclair Enterprises, where her dreams had once found their footing. She had been Daniel Sinclair's executive assistant, not just a scheduler, not just a presence behind the scenes, but his anchor. Day after day, she'd fielded crises, whispered truths others were afraid to speak, and learned the rhythm of Daniel's mind like music. She was the only one who dared challenge him, and he listened. The tension between them had grown like a wildfire wrapped in silk. It wasn't just late nights and shared glances. There were moments neither dared to name. Like the night she brought him dinner during a merger panic, and he reached across the table, brushing her fingers as he said, "You're the only one I trust." Then came the pendant. It had arrived in a navy velvet box, resting atop her desk like an invitation to a truth they'd never spoken aloud. Her birthstone, delicate, gleaming. The card inside read, "So you always remember your worth." She had closed the box quickly, her hands trembling, and buried it deep in her bag. That night, her world shattered. Elena had stayed late to file paperwork for the Sinclair-Merriman merger. Alone in Daniel's private office, she'd clicked through digital archives, mostly standard contracts and tax filings. But one folder, mistitled under an old project code, caught her eye. Within seconds, she saw her mother's name. Elena Cruz, former Sinclair employee, wrongful termination case settled in arbitration, confidential payout signed by Daniel's father, Richard Sinclair. Elena's heart pounded. Her mother had never told her the details, only that she'd been wrongfully accused and fired when Elena was a teenager. It had destroyed their family's finances. Her mother had cleaned houses for years after that, in silence and shame. Daniel's family had been behind it. Fingers trembling, Elena printed 2 pages and tucked them into her purse. She didn't want to believe he knew. She needed to ask? She had to. Just then, voices echoed from the conference room down the hall. She followed them silently, standing just outside the glass door. Daniel was speaking with board members, confident, strategic, charming as ever. Loyalty merger locks in loyalty from the older shareholders, one board member said. Protect the legacy, Daniel replied. My father's reputation stays intact. That's the priority. Elena's chest caved inward. Legacy, reputation, not truth, not accountability. She backed away from the glass, footsteps soft as air, her stomach churning. Her mind screamed, he's just like his... She felt sick. What made it worse, what made her knees nearly buckle, was what she'd learned just 3 days before. She was pregnant. The realization had shaken her to her core. She hadn't told anyone, not even Maricel, her best friend, not Daniel. And now she wouldn't. She returned to her small studio apartment, ripped the pendant from her neck, and sobbed until dawn. By morning, her decision was made. She left no resignation letter, no forwarded number. She tossed her phone, withdrew every dollar from her bank account, and vanished into a new name, a new city, a new life. Elena moved 3 states away under the name Ella Navarro, renting a small room behind a bakery owned by a widow who never asked too many questions. She took a job waiting tables, hid her pregnancy under oversized aprons, and kept her eyes down, even when every instinct in her body begged her to look back. She gave birth to twin boys in a county hospital. No father listed on the birth certificates, no family present. Just her, gasping through the pain, and 2 lives she promised to protect with everything she had left. She named them Peo and Lucas. Names full of warmth, of hope, of everything she hadn't been allowed to have. As months passed, she worked nights and held her boys through fevers, tantrums, and first steps. She whispered lullabies Daniel once hummed without knowing she'd memorized every note. She carried their world on her back, never once letting them know the burden she bore. There were days she ached to call him, to tell him he had sons who looked just like him. But then she'd see the documents hidden in her bottom drawer, her mother's name, the lies. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't bring her boys into a world where legacy mattered more than truth. And yet, as the boys grew, so did the questions. Why don't we have a dad? Who's in this picture? Pointing at the pendant she had eventually tucked into a keepsake box alongside their hospital wristbands and her ultrasound photo. Every year on their birthday, she'd sit on the edge of her bed after they fell asleep, staring at the pendant. Every time she picked it up, she'd ask herself if she was doing the right thing. She never had an answer. Then came the charity gala. She hadn't planned on going, but she'd heard whispers through the nonprofit she now volunteered with that Sinclair Enterprises was hosting a major event supporting children's education programs. Mateo had been selected to sing in the children's choir. She couldn't say no. She wore a simple black dress, her hair up, the pendant around her neck barely visible. The twins held her hands, oblivious to the world they were walking into. When they entered the ballroom, her legs nearly gave out. There he was. Daniel. Older, sharper, but still him, the way his jaw clenched when he was thinking, the way he touched his cufflink absently while scanning a room. She knew those mannerisms like the beat of her own heart. Their eyes locked. She turned, grabbing the boy's hands. He stepped forward. She stepped back. And then she did the only thing she could. She took out the photo, the one of Mateo and Lucas holding signs that said, "First day of pre." She tucked it in an envelope, wrote just 6 words. "To talk, but not here." She placed it on the edge of the donation table, just as the lights dimmed for the children's choir to take the stage. As her sons sang, unaware, Elena looked across the room once more. Daniel was holding the envelope now. His hands were shaking. Her past had caught up with her. And this time, she wouldn't be able to run. The knock came just after sunset. Elena froze in the kitchen, the scent of simmering arroz con pollo still warm in the air. Through the thin curtain, she saw the sleek black car parked by the curb. Her chest tightened. She didn't have to guess who it was. Daniel Sinclair. He stood at the threshold in a tailored coat, jaw clenched, eyes unreadable. She opened the door before he could knock again. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. The house was small, modest but tidy. Toys were stacked in a crate near the sofa, crayon drawings taped to the fridge. One featured 3 stick figures, 2 little boys and a man with a tie. Daniel saw it. He didn't speak for a moment. "You live here?" His voice was lower than she remembered, roughened by disbelief. She nodded. "It's been home. For us?" He turned to her sharply. "Us. You and the boys." Her breath hitched. "Their names are Leo and Elias." Daniel's eyes moved from the drawing to the hallway where faint laughter echoed. "Q? He didn't even give me a chance to know them," he said, his voice tight. "You let me believe you were gone, and that I had nothing left." "I didn't plan to fall off the earth," Elena said, arms folded over her chest. "But after I saw what your father did, after what I overheard about the merger..." "You should have talked to me," she whispered. "But I panicked, and then I found out I was pregnant." Daniel blinked hard. "I didn't know how to bring children into a world where power excused everything. I wanted to protect them. And I wasn't sure who you really were anymore. You know now." She didn't answer right away. Just then, the hallway door creaked open, and 2 little boys, mirror images of Daniel at age 6, peeked around the corner. Messy hair, matching pajamas, curious brown eyes. "Mom?" one of them asked, pointing. "Who's that?" Before Elena could reply, the other boy stepped forward boldly. "Are you our friend? We don't get a lot of visitors." Daniel knelt, breath caught in his throat. I might be more than a friend." The boys looked at each other. Then, without warning, Leo launched into his arms. Daniel caught him, stunned. Then Elias followed, laughing. "Am I Leo?" one said. "Amias?" the other chimed in. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Daniel blinked fast, struggling to hold back emotion. "Yeah, I think I do." Elena stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold. Daniel looked up at her, eyes shimmering. They deserved to know their father. She nodded. "Then start by being here. One step at a time." The next morning, Daniel returned, not in a suit, not with his driver, but in jeans and a sweatshirt, holding a bag of chocolate chip muffins. Elena raised an eyebrow as she opened the door. "You bake now?" "I don't," he said, lifting the bag, "but I bribe well." Inside, Leo and Elias squealed at the sight of him. "Daddy," Daniel said gently, crouching to their level. "You can call me Daddy." The room fell silent. Elena's heart skipped. The boys looked at each other, confused. Like, "You're our dad?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I didn't know before, but now I do. And I want to be here, if that's okay." They stared at him, then Elias grinned wide. "Can you build Legos?" "And try," Daniel replied, voice thick. Elena watched from the doorway, clutching the pendant Daniel had once given her years ago. It had never left her neck. Later, while the boys played, Daniel turned to her. "I want to make this right." "We's no fixing lost years," she replied softly. "Only moving forward, if we choose to." You nodded. Then let me move forward with them, with you. She hesitated. I still have doubts, Daniel. Fears. No. But I'm not that man from 4 years ago. And if it takes the rest of my life to earn back your trust, I'll do it. The words weren't polished or rehearsed, but they landed deeply. Elena stepped outside for air and found Daniel had already started trimming the overgrown bushes by the porch. No cameras, no staff, just a man trying to belong in a life he never knew he had. Over the following weeks, Daniel came every day, mornings with cereal spills and sticky fingers, evenings filled with bedtime stories and twin giggles. The boys adored him. And Elena, despite herself, began to smile again. But it wasn't without hesitation. One afternoon, after Leo fell asleep on Daniel's chest during a nap, Elena sat beside him on the couch. "Why didn't you push harder back then?" she asked. Daniel looked at her. "Because I thought if you left, maybe I wasn't worth staying for." Her eyes brimmed. "I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't love the world around you. And let me build a new one where you and our sons never have to run again." For the first time, she didn't pull away. The next day, the boys ran through the front yard, laughing under a sky as clear as possibility. Daniel watched them, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he turned to Elena. "I want them to have my name, if that's something you'd be open to." Elena's breath caught, not because of legacy or pride, but because it meant something deeper. Acknowledgement, commitment, belonging. "I'll think about it," she said. Later that evening, she found a small envelope tucked into her coat pocket. Inside was a drawing, crude and childlike, 2 stick figures labeled Mom and Dad, holding hands. Between them were 2 smaller figures, smiling. On the back, Daniel had written, "Whatever happens next, let it be honest, let it be together." Elena pressed the paper to her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. Daniel arrived early that Saturday morning, a nervous flutter in his chest he hadn't felt since his first IPO. He had always thought business meetings were high stakes until he met his sons. Leo was already waiting at the door with a football in hand, eyes wide with anticipation. Elias peeked out from behind the curtain, clutching a book almost as big as his chest. "Ready?" Daniel asked, trying not to let the tremor in his voice show. Leo nodded and ran outside, dragging Daniel toward the yard. For the next hour, the sounds of laughter replaced silence as father and sons clumsily tossed the ball. Elias eventually joined, shyly at first, but warmed up when Daniel started narrating their game like a sports announcer. Afterward, they collapsed onto the porch steps with cups of lemonade. Leo leaned against Daniel's side, sweat drying on his brow. "Mom says you used to be her boss," Leo said suddenly. "Is that true?" Daniel nodded. "I was, a long time ago." "She said you were really smart," Elias added, looking up from his book. "Are you?" Daniel chuckled. "Sometimes, but I think your mom's smarter." The boys laughed. Daniel's chest tightened with a strange, beautiful ache. He hadn't expected how much joy 2 small voices could bring. Over the next week, Daniel made a point to visit every other day. Sometimes he brought puzzles, sometimes takeout, sometimes nothing but his time. He helped Elias build a solar system model for school, and he taught Leo how to balance on his bike without training wheels. On one visit, Leo skinned his knee, and Daniel instinctively picked him up, cradling him as the boy sobbed into his shoulder. "Dad," Leo whispered between hiccups. Dan faltered. He blinked, unsure he had heard it right. But Leo said it again, this time not in fear or confusion, but certainty. "Face, Dad." A lump rose in Daniel's throat. He hadn't earned the title, not yet, but in that moment, he vowed he would. The next morning, Daniel stopped by the house with breakfast. He found Elena in the kitchen, her eyes tired and shoulders tense. She tried to smile as she poured coffee, but the effort was heavy. "I saw the papers," she murmured, sliding the cup across the counter. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." He had seen the headlines too. Mysterious woman spotted with billionaire Daniel Sinclair. Twins involved? It didn't take long for cameras to appear outside Elena's modest neighborhood. A photographer even shouted questions from the sidewalk. Daniel had immediately doubled security. But the damage had been done. Elena's landlord, a nervous man who valued reputation more than people, left her a notice on the door that morning. Media attention violates rental agreement. Vacate within 30 days. Let me move you, Daniel said softly. I have a private estate 2 hours from the city. No press, high walls. You and the boys would be safe. Elena shook her head. We're not a problem for you to fix. I'm not fixing. I'm trying to protect what's mine too now, he replied. Let me protect them. She stared at him for a long moment, the same eyes that once looked at him with trust now clouded with years of survival. Only if I keep my autonomy, she said, and only until I find something else. Daniel nodded. Of course. That night, they packed. The boys thought it was a grand adventure. Daniel hired movers and a full security team. Elena stayed silent during the ride, arms crossed, staring out the window. But when they arrived, Leo and Elias ran through the halls of the estate like it was a castle. Their laughter echoed, and Daniel knew, for now, it was enough. The estate was nestled between groves of oak trees and backed by a serene lake, the kind of place where silence was soothing instead of heavy. Elena unpacked slowly, placing the boys' belongings into the spare bedrooms Daniel had prepared. She refused help even when he offered. It wasn't about pride, it was about control, the last thing she still had after years of hiding. That evening, Daniel knocked gently on her door. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, folding one of Leo's shirts. You don't have to do this alone, he said, his voice low. Not anymore. She didn't look up. I've done it alone for 4 years. It's what I know. I know, he said softly, but maybe you don't have to keep knowing it. The boys adjusted quickly to their new environment. They explored the lake, raced toy cars along the marble hallways, and giggled at the way Daniel burned toast. Leo took to Daniel's presence like a magnet, and Elias, though slower to open up, began asking questions only Daniel could answer. About stars, about buildings, about how people change. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the tall windows of the library, Elias climbed onto Daniel's lap, book in hand. Did you miss us before you knew us? He asked. Daniel hesitated. Every day. I just didn't know what was missing. Elena overheard it from the hallway. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from the quiet realization that the man she had feared might not be the man he had become. Still, the past wasn't erased by a few afternoons and bedtime stories. When Daniel met with his legal team the next day, he requested a custody consultation, not to take Elena to court, but to understand his rights and responsibilities. He wanted to do things properly, not out of ego, but respect. That night, he approached her again, papers in hand. Permanently, but by force. I want us to figure this out together, he said. Augustine. Elena scanned the documents, her fingers trembling slightly. This isn't a trap? She asked. No, it's a beginning, he said, with no secrets. Elena exhaled. Then let's begin. In the following weeks, a rhythm formed. Daniel helped with schoolwork in the mornings before heading to the city for business. Elena resumed her freelance work remotely, regaining a sense of identity beyond motherhood. In the evenings, they all ate together, sometimes quiet, sometimes chaotic, but always together. One evening, Leo called out from the den, Dad, come see my drawing. Daniel looked up from his phone and rushed in. On the floor was a crayon masterpiece of stick figures, 2 boys, a tall man, and a woman with curly hair. Above them, in Leo's bold handwriting, were the words, Our Family. Daniel crouched down and smiled. That's perfect, buddy. Leo beamed. Do you like your tie? I drew it blue, because that's your favorite. Daniel's throat tightened. You remembered? From the doorway, Elena watched the scene unfold. A part of her still held fear of heartbreak, of being wrong about him again. But in that moment, watching her sons cling to a man who had once been her everything, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, their broken pieces could still be part of something whole. They weren't perfect, but together, they were becoming something real. And real was enough, for now. The storm didn't arrive with thunder, it came as headlines. Daniel opened his email one morning to see a subject line blinking at him. Urgent, press leak. Attached were screenshots of online tabloids and social media accounts flooded with the same story. Sinclair heirs, or gold digger with a hidden past? The article was brutal. It exposed Elena's past lawsuit against Sinclair Enterprises, her time as Daniel's assistant, and the suspicious timing of her return, now with 2 children tied to the company's heir. They didn't stop at rumors. They twisted facts, distorted timelines, and painted Elena as a scheming opportunist. He stared at the screen, fury rising in his chest. Someone inside had done this. Someone with access and an agenda. Meanwhile, Elena sat frozen in the sunroom, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She had just read it, too. The boys were outside with a tutor, but their voices felt distant, as if muffled behind a wall of shame and fear. "To go," she said when Daniel entered. "You're not going anywhere," he replied. "They don't get to do this to you." "We've lived this before," she whispered. "The whispers, the assumptions. I survived it once. I'm not putting the boys through it." Daniel knelt beside her, reaching for her hand. "You're not the one who should be ashamed, and this time, you're not facing it alone." But Elena's eyes were clouded. She remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to watch her mother lose everything because of a corporation. She'd fought to protect her sons from that pain. Now, they were being pulled into the same shadow she once ran from. The media frenzy camped outside the estate's gates. Anonymous messages filled Elena's inbox, some kind, most cruel. Articles dissected her history. A few even hinted that the boys might not be Daniel's, questioning the legitimacy of her story. Daniel moved fast. That afternoon, he held a press conference. Dressed in a gray suit, his voice was firm, his words measured, but beneath it was fire. "The woman you're talking about is not just anyone. She's the mother of my children, she's the woman I trust, and anyone who tries to paint her as anything less will have to answer to me." Cameras clicked, headlines changed, but the damage lingered. Later that evening, Daniel met privately with the private investigator he had hired weeks ago to look into his father's history. The man placed a sealed folder on the desk. "It's all here," he said. "Your father knew about Elena's mother. The firing wasn't just personal, it was calculated. There was a payout to silence the complaint. The board helped bury it." Daniel opened the folder slowly. His father's signature, confidential memos, legal correspondence. It was all there. Truth and consequence. But it came at a price. One of the board members, a man named Archer Wolf, summoned Daniel the next day to a private meeting. "You're treading dangerous ground," Archer said coldly. "We've tolerated your emotional outbursts, but digging into your father's legacy, reopening buried files, it destabilizes the company." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm not destabilizing anything. I'm exposing the truth." "If you keep going," Archer warned, "the board will consider replacing you. Public image is one thing, but corporate liability, that's another." Back home, Daniel stood in his study, long after midnight, staring out at the dark lake. The twins were asleep, upstairs. Elena was curled up on the couch, unaware of the ultimatum that now weighed on his shoulders. He could protect the company his family built, or he could clear Elena's name and risk everything. The next morning, Daniel sat at the breakfast table with Elias and Leo, pouring orange juice into their mismatched superhero mugs. The boys were chatting about cartoons and arguing over whose cereal had more marshmallows, completely unaware of the storm outside their safe bubble. They looked. They looked at them, really looked. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their smiles. They were his, and they were watching him now. "Daddy," Elias asked gently, "why were people shouting outside again?" Daniel hesitated, spoon in hand. "Some people say things they don't understand, but what matters is, we know what's true, right?" Leo nodded. "Like Mama said, when people lie, we tell the truth louder." Daniel smiled at that. A small, warm ember in the middle of the wreckage. Later that afternoon, Elena sat on the back porch, her laptop open but untouched. She was trying to write a statement for her pro bono legal support role, but the words wouldn't come. Daniel stepped outside, sliding a folder across the table. "It's all here," he said. "Everything your mother went through. I know now. And I'm sorry." Elena opened the folder. Her hands trembled as she scanned the documents. Memos that should have protected her mother. Letters her family had never seen. There it was, proof that what happened wasn't just injustice, it was deliberate. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I used to think I was crazy for leaving," she whispered, "but I wasn't. I saw what I saw." Daniel sat beside her. "And you protected the twins, even when I didn't know they existed." She said, "Afraid of who you might become." He nodded slowly. "I'm afraid of that too sometimes, but I don't want to be my father. I want to be better." They sat in silence for a long while, until Leo burst through the sliding door, breathless and giggling. "Elias just lost a tooth," he shouted. "And he says he swallowed it." Elena stood, startled, but Daniel chuckled. "Looks like the tooth fairy's going to have to wing it tonight." That evening, while the boys slept under a ceiling of glow-in-the-dark stars, Daniel sat down and opened his laptop. He drafted an internal letter to the board. It wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration. He acknowledged the company's past, announced a full investigation, and included the files that proved the wrongful termination and silencing of Elena's mother. He ended with a clear warning. "Protecting corruption is no longer acceptable under my leadership." He hit send. The fallout came swiftly. Phone calls, angry emails, accusations of betrayal, threats to his position. But for the first time, Daniel didn't feel afraid. He felt free. Later that week, Sinclair Enterprises released a public statement acknowledging past ethical oversights and committed to reevaluating company culture. News outlets changed their tune. The headlines shifted. Daniel Sinclair defends former assistant in corporate ethics scandal. Elena Cruz vindicated after years in the shadows. Still, not everything was fixed. Elena was cautious. She still flinched when the phone rang or cameras clicked. One evening, Daniel found her outside under the stars, wrapped in a blanket. "I don't want to be in hiding anymore," she murmured, "but I also don't know how to be in the light." "You don't have to know," he said, sitting beside her. "You just have to let me stand with you in both." She turned her head slowly. "And what if I fall again?" "Then I'll be there," he promised, "not to catch you, but to fall with you." She didn't respond with words, but she took his hand and didn't let go. The press conference room buzzed with anticipation, cameras flashing, reporters whispering theories. No one expected Daniel Sinclair to speak today, especially not like this. He stepped onto the stage alone, no teleprompter, no prepared statement. Just a microphone, his steady breath, and eyes that had seen too much in silence. "I'm not here as a CEO," Daniel began, voice firm but raw. "I'm here as a father and a man who's been both blind and silent for too long." A hush fell. He continued, "4 years ago, a woman who worked beside me every day, Elena Cruz, disappeared. What the world didn't know, what even I didn't know then, was that she left, carrying the truth and my children." A gasp rippled through the room. He was painted by the press as manipulative, as if her silence was a scheme. But the truth is, his voice cracked slightly, my father orchestrated a cover-up, one that cost her family everything, one that nearly made me the villain in the life of the only woman who ever truly saw me. Flashes erupted again. Hands shot up with questions, but Daniel raised his own hand, stopping them. "I hired a private investigator. I wanted answers. What I found broke me, and then rebuilt me." He reached into his coat pocket and held up a folder. "These are the files that prove my father's board leveraged insider control to suppress lawsuits, including the wrongful termination of Elena's mother. They buried her voice. And Elena found the documents that could have Cameras zoomed in. Reporters began typing furiously. Answered him. She didn't run to gain anything. She ran to protect everything. Our sons, her dignity, and what little safety she had left. Daniel's voice grew stronger. I never married. I never stopped wondering, and when she walked into that gala, I saw everything I'd been missing. Not just her face, but what was behind it. The courage, the pain, and the strength to raise our children alone. A flicker of movement backstage. Elena stood just behind the curtain, hand pressed to her heart. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she watched him speak the words he never could before. The board has given me an ultimatum, Daniel said. They want silence again? They want me to bury this. He paused, eyes scanning the room. The audience froze. I offer my resignation to Sinclair Enterprises, effective immediately, unless this company commits to full transparency, to compensating those harmed, and to investing in communities we once exploited. Then something unexpected happened. A younger board member, Rachel Langston, stood from her seat in the front row. We don't accept your resignation, she said clearly. We accept your leadership. Other investors joined her, standing slowly in agreement. Applause broke out, not polite but real. It built like thunder. Daniel stepped back, overwhelmed. For the first time in years, the silence around him didn't feel like grief. It felt like justice. Backstage, Elena wiped her tears. She hadn't expected him to go public. Not like this, not with everything. As the applause swelled, Daniel turned and caught sight of her. Their eyes met. Later that evening, they stood outside under the canopy of night. You didn't have to do that, Elena whispered. Good, Daniel replied, because for once, I'm not protecting the company. I'm protecting you and our boys. She didn't respond immediately. Her voice caught. You still love me? Daniel stepped closer. I never stopped. I just didn't know how to fight then. I do now. Elena looked down, torn between trust and fear. I don't know if I'm ready. That's okay, he said softly. I'll wait. And for the first time since the night she ran, Elena didn't walk away. That night, Elena sat on the guesthouse porch at Daniel's private estate, barefoot, a warm mug in her hands. The boys were asleep inside, the stars overhead blinking like promises, ones she'd never dared to ask for. Daniel approached slowly, not wanting to break the moment. He carried a blanket and gently draped it over her shoulders before sitting beside her. She didn't speak right away. Then, softly, I thought I knew everything about you back then, but tonight, I saw a different man. He looked down at his hands. I should have been that man 4 years ago. I was so angry, she admitted, not just at what your father did, but at you, because I thought you were going to choose them over truth, over me. Daniel's jaw tightened. I wish I had known. I wish I had asked more questions instead of assuming silence meant guilt. You deserved better. Her gaze dropped to her lap. So, did you? A long pause. The wind rustled through the trees, like a hush falling between their hearts. Do they know? Elena asked quietly. Daniel nodded. The board? Yes, and I meant what I said. If they pushed back, I was ready to walk away. But instead, they backed me. Some even said they were waiting for someone to finally say it. Elena turned to face him, and if they hadn't, I still would have done it. There was no hesitation, and somehow that mattered more than all the applause he'd received earlier that day. She studied his face. You know, I never stopped loving you either. I just didn't trust that love would be strong enough to survive the truth. He gave a soft, almost broken smile. It didn't have to survive it. It had to grow into it. She nodded, a tear escaping down her cheek. You're good with them, Leah and Elias. I see myself in them, he said, eyes softening, but I see you more. Your fire, your calm, your bravery. We adore you. Adore them. She hesitated, then whispered, Do you forgive me? Daniel looked at her for a long time. There's nothing to forgive. You did what you had to protect them, to survive. I only wish I'd been someone you could run to instead of away from. Elena closed her eyes, emotions swelling in her chest. Now, she asked, voice barely above a breath. Now, he said, reaching for her hand. I just want to build something real, with them, and maybe with you. No secrets, no silence, just truth. Every messy, painful, honest part of it. A tremble passed through her fingers, but she didn't pull away. Then we start slowly, she whispered. Not for me, not for you, but for the boys. They deserve a home built on truth. He nodded. Then that's what we'll give them. A quiet moment passed between them, and then, from the house, came a soft thud, the sound of little feet on the floor. Elias appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. Mama? Elena rose. I'm here, baby. The boy saw Daniel and smiled sleepily. Daddy, too? Daniel's breath caught. It was the first time Elias had said it without hesitation. Elena's eyes met his, and she nodded. You, she said softly. Daddy, too. Daniel crossed the space and scooped Elias into his arms, holding him like something precious and irreplaceable. And as the child's small head rested on his shoulder, Elena leaned against Daniel, wrapped in the warmth of a beginning neither of them had planned for, but both of them finally chose. Not out of fear, but out of truth. Out of love. The sun draped its golden warmth across the private estate lawn as laughter echoed from the grass. Leo and Elias, barefoot and grinning, raced across the freshly mown field with paintbrushes in hand. Their small canvas boards lay propped up on easels, covered in streaks of color, vibrant and chaotic, like their energy. Daniel knelt beside them, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of red paint on his cheek. Elena watched from the patio, one hand resting over her heart. It had been weeks since she moved in temporarily for the boys' safety. Weeks filled with hesitant breakfasts, quiet conversations, and unspoken healing. What once felt impossible now bloomed with cautious hope. All right, artists, Daniel said, gently nudging the twins. Remember our plan? Leo saluted with a giggle. Operation Surprise, Mama? Elias nodded solemnly. We practiced. Daniel handed each boy a small velvet box. He whispered instructions again, and they hurried off toward the patio, where Elena now sat with a glass of iced tea. Mama, Leo called, nearly tripping over a garden stone. We made something for you, Elias added, placing his box carefully in her lap. Leo followed, eager and impatient. Elena smiled, a soft crease forming at the corners of her eyes. You two planned this? They nodded in unison. Open them, Leo insisted. She glanced toward the lawn, but Daniel was nowhere in sight. With careful fingers, Elena opened the first box. Inside was her pendant, the one Daniel had given her years ago, the night before everything fell apart. Its silver chain shimmered like memory, and the cracked gemstone had been carefully restored, glowing like the fire of second chances. Her fingers trembled slightly. How did you... But the boys only smiled and urged her to open the second box. Within it, nestled in velvet, was a ring. Simple, elegant, a single diamond, but it was the message it carried, the undeniable truth wrapped around her finger even before she put it on him, that left her breathless. Boys, she whispered, voice catching in her throat. Look behind you, Elias grinned. She turned slowly. Daniel stood at the edge of the lawn, dressed in a soft blue button-up shirt, eyes steady, hands behind his back. His expression held none of the bravado from his CEO days. No performance, no pressure, just him. Real, present. He walked toward her, slow and deliberate. The boys scampered to the side, giddy with anticipation. When he reached her, Daniel dropped to one knee. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. He took a breath. You disappeared once, and even though the world told me to move on, I didn't. I couldn't, not because I was stuck in the past, but because something inside me knew you were still out there. Tears welled in her eyes, the boxes still open in her lap. Daniel continued, his voice steady but emotional. I didn't want to propose to who we were back then. I'm asking now, in this moment, after all the truths, after all the time. I want to build this life, with you, and with our boys, not because of what we lost, but because of everything we still have to give. He reached for the ring, holding it between them. "Elena Cruz, will you marry me?" She didn't move at first, the silence holding its breath. Then, softly, through a trembling smile, she nodded. "Yes." The word was quiet, but it landed like thunder in his heart. For a moment, the entire world seemed to pause. Daniel stood slowly, slipping the ring onto her finger with a reverence that made her heart ache. Elena stared at it, not because of its beauty, but because of what it symbolized. Not a return to what they had, but the beginning of something new, something earned. Bio shouted. She said yes. Elias followed with a squeal. "Yay! We're all a family now." They rushed forward, hugging both parents in a chaotic tangle of arms and giggles. Elena knelt, wrapping her arms around them tightly, overwhelmed by the moment. Daniel bent down beside them, and for the first time, all four were locked together, laughing through tears. Later that evening, the backyard shimmered under soft lantern light. A small celebration unfolded, not for the press or society, but for the family they'd fought to become. Elena, barefoot now, walked through the grass while holding the twins' hands. Daniel trailed close behind, a glass of sparkling cider in his hand and a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. Music played faintly from speakers tucked under the garden's awning, an instrumental version of the melody Elena used to hum to the boys when they were still small enough to fit in her arms. Daniel reached her side, his voice low and full of wonder. "You know, they asked if we'd be getting married tomorrow." Elena laughed softly. "They're eager." He smiled. "They're ready, and I think so am I." She met his gaze, her heart pounding, not from fear but from the sheer beauty of finally feeling safe. As the twins chased fireflies in the background, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" Elena asked. He handed it to her. "It's from my old journal, something I wrote the day after you left." She unfolded it, her fingers careful. His voice was gentle as she read the words to herself. "I don't know where you've gone. I only know that every part of this house feels like a memory I can't touch. I see your coffee mug in the sink, your sweater on the chair, the ghost of your laugh in the hallway, and yet, it's the silence that haunts me most. The silence of a woman I never had the courage to truly tell." Elena blinked back tears. Daniel took her hand. "I couldn't say it then, but I will now. Stay. Not because of guilt, not because of the past. Stay because we're finally writing the truth." She didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him softly, her hand resting against his heart. When they parted, her voice came out quiet but certain. "I'm not leaving this time." Nearby, the twins had begun stacking stones to make a fort, completely unaware of the history unfolding in their parents' hearts. Daniel wrapped an arm around Elena and pulled her close. "You know, I always thought strength was in power and control, but it's not." She looked up at him, curious. "It's in forgiveness," he said, "in second chances, in choosing love even when it's messy." Elena smiled through a tear. "Then, I think we're stronger than we ever were." As the stars began to shimmer overhead, Daniel held her tighter, knowing this wasn't a moment to be broadcast or written into headlines. It was simply theirs. Two boys, two hearts, one promise remade in the quiet of a lawn beneath the hush of healing. And this time, it was for keeps. 3 months later, the Sinclair Foundation held its inaugural Women and Family Equity Gala beneath the arched glass dome of its new headquarters in the heart of the city. Guests in elegant gowns and suits moved through the reception area, where portraits of women who had left the corporate world to raise children adorned the walls. Women who had once been made invisible, now framed in light and dignity. Elena stood near the edge of the stage, in a sleek navy gown, her hair pinned loosely, a small silver pendant at her throat, the same one Daniel had given her years ago. This time, it was not a symbol of remembrance. It was a symbol of choice. The scholarship fund had her name on it, Elena Cruz Sinclair. It felt strange to see the name displayed across the banner behind her, not because she hadn't earned it, but because she had never believed she could claim it without losing herself. But now, the name didn't erase her, it honored her journey. Daniel watched her from the front row, his arm around Elias, who sat neatly dressed in a little blazer. Leo, of course, kept shifting in his seat, too energetic to sit still for long, his eyes darting to the stage and back to the hallway behind them, probably hoping for snacks. When Elena stepped to the microphone, the room quieted instantly. She looked down at the podium, then out at the crowd, her voice steady and sure. "I used to believe that walking away meant failure," she began, "that stepping back from a career, from ambition, from the chaos of building a name in this world, made me weak." Few women in the crowd nodded, their expressions touched with quiet understanding. "The day I left wasn't the day I gave up," Elena continued. "It was the day I chose peace. The day I chose to become a mother who protected her sons before anyone else knew their names." There was a long pause as her eyes found Daniel's in the crowd. She smiled, soft but proud. "It's now. I stand before you not as someone who ran," she said, "but as someone who returned, stronger, wiser, and still whole. There is no shame in walking away to protect your peace. And there is incredible power in choosing to come back on your own terms." The room erupted into applause. Then, with a gentle wave of her hand, she invited Leo and Elias to the stage. The twins ran up, hands in their pockets, cheeks glowing. Each boy held a small card. They stood beside her, nervously glancing at the crowd. Daniel rose from his seat and joined them, a subtle nod from the event manager signaling the shift in program. He took the microphone and looked at Elena. "We's one more thing," he said, his voice warm and controlled. "Today is about honoring the women who raised children while building strength from behind the scenes. And today, I want to honor the name of a mother who never gave up, even when she had every reason to." He turned to the crowd. "From this moment forward, Leo and Elias will no longer have two separate worlds." He nodded to a nearby screen. It lit up, displaying the legal document: Leo Cruz is Sinclair and Elias Cruz is Sinclair. The crowd gasped, followed by a standing ovation. Elena brought a hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. "Carry both legacies now," Daniel said. "Not because they have to, but because they deserve every part of their story." After the applause faded and the gala shifted into a celebratory reception, the Sinclair family slipped away quietly into the courtyard behind the new foundation building. The sun had just begun to set, casting gold across the marble tiles and glass walls. There, in the center of the courtyard, stood a young tree, small but rooted, its leaves dancing in the evening breeze. Elena crouched beside Leo and Elias as they held tiny shovels in their hands. The boys giggled, dirt smudged across their fingers, their excitement radiating through every movement. Daniel joined them, his suit jacket tossed onto a nearby bench, sleeves rolled up. "Ready?" Elena asked gently. The twins nodded. Together, as a family, they planted the final layer of soil around the sapling's roots. The plaque had already been placed, gleaming in bronze. For every woman who was told she wasn't enough, this is proof she was. Elena's fingers brushed the engraved words, her breath caught. Years of silence, struggle, and self-doubt whispered behind her, but they no longer owned her. Daniel stood behind her, his hands resting on her shoulders. "You built this," he said softly. "Not just the foundation, but this moment." She turned to face him. "We built it, all of us. In that quiet corner of the world, it wasn't about fortune, power, or redemption. It was about truth, spoken aloud, and love, learned and chosen." Elena took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of everything they had survived. "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" she asked Daniel. He smiled. "That your resume was too impressive for an assistant." "No," she laughed. "You said, you don't belong behind a desk." He chuckled. "Well, I was right." She shook her head with a teasing smirk. "You were impossible." "I still am," he said. She reached for his hand. "And yet, I'm still here." They turned to watch their sons run circles around the tree, pretending to be superheroes. For a moment, all the noise of the past faded into nothing. Then Daniel leaned in, his voice low and intimate. "Elena Sinclair," he whispered, "welcome home." She smiled, the name no longer foreign. "It's the name I chose," she replied, "not the one I ran from." They didn't need fireworks or fanfare. They had this, an evening soaked in purpose, a family redefined, a legacy grounded not in wealth or reputation, but in truth. Later that night, after the boys were tucked into bed and the gala crowd had long gone, Elena returned to the courtyard alone. She ran her fingers along the tree's trunk and sat beside it in the cool grass. In her lap was a journal, a new one, gifted by Daniel. Inside were pages left blank, waiting for new stories. She opened to the first page and wrote, "Today, I stood in my name. Today, my children stood in theirs, and none of us are hiding anymore." She closed the journal and looked up at the stars. From somewhere inside the house, she heard laughter. Daniel's deep, warm tone, the twins arguing over bedtime stories. Elena Cruz Sinclair breathed it all in. This was not a perfect life, but it was hers. And finally, she belonged in it.